Hello, my name is Zach Wendell, and today I'll be presenting on a topic that every one of us experiences every day, mind wandering. Mind wandering is when our attention drifts away from the task in front of us and shifts towards our own internal thoughts, daydreams, or unrelated concerns. Even though it feels small and automatic, psychological research shows that the mind wandering has a powerful impact on how we learn, how creative we are, and even how safely we perform tasks like driving. In this presentation, I'll walk through three assigned articles and one additional peer-reviewed article that help explain the causes, consequences, and complexity of mind wandering. Then I'll tie everything together with an integrated section and conclusion with a follow-up study idea that extends the current research. What is mind wandering? Mind wandering is defined as a shift of attention away from the primary task towards internal thought. It's sometimes called task unrelated thought. What's interesting is how common it is. Some estimates say we spend up to 50% of our walking lives in this state. Psychologists study mind wandering for several reasons. First, it affects performance, especially when task requires strong attention or working memory. Second, it reveals something about how our brain allocates mental resources, especially during long or boring tasks. Third, it has both positive and negative effects, which makes it more complicated than just being simply good or bad. We drift off in class, during conversations, and even while driving. Studying mind wandering helps us understand why this happens, when it becomes a problem, and when it may actually even benefit us. This research provides insight into attention, memory, self regulation, and even creativity. The first study by Sanchez and Naylor examines how mind wandering affects learning while reading science material. Participants read a passage and then respond to random probes that asked whether they were paying attention or mind wandering at that exact moment. The key findings of this study were higher levels of wandering predicted significantly lower comprehension on later tests. But even more importantly, mind wandering increased misunderstandings, meaning people didn't just forget the information, they actually encoded it incorrectly. This is important because misunderstandings are harder to correct than simply forgetting it. If you zone out in class and you think you understood something that you didn't, you can build an entire chain of a foundation based on false information. This study highlights that mind wandering is especially harmful while reading because comprehension requires continuous attention. Even brief lapses can disrupt the flow of understanding. It tells us that attention isn't just helpful or for learning, it's essential for accurate learning. While the previous study showed the negative effects, Barrett et al. Demonstrate the potential benefits of mind wandering, specifically in terms of creativity. Participants worked on a creative problem, solving tasks, took a break, and then returned to the task. During the break, some participants rested, some completed a demanding task, and some did a very undemanding task. The undemanding task produced the most mind wandering. The big finding was that participants who mind wandered generated significantly more creative solutions afterwards. Why does this happen? The authors explain that mind wandering allows the brain to incubate ideas in the background, combining information in ways that aren't possible during focused attention. When the mind drifts, it explores solutions more freely. This tells us that mind wandering has cognitive value. It promotes creativity when we're not working on attention heavy tasks. This dual nature of mind wandering is key. The same process that hurts reading can help creative thinking. The third study by Baldwin looks at mind wandering in a real world high stakes scenario, driving. Using a driving simulator and an EEG recording, they measured participants' brain activity and driving performance. They found that mind wandering cannot be reliably detected using EEG patterns tied to internal attention. When people mind wandered, they showed slower reaction times, poor lane control, and greater driving errors. This study shows two critical things. First, that mind wandering reduces situational awareness during demanding tasks. And second, it can be detected psychologically, which means future technology like driver assisted systems could potentially identify when a driver is zoning out. So, when mind wandering might boost creativity in some contexts, it may be dangerous in others. This study highlights the risks of attention lapses in real world environments. The final article is the additional article in which I chose the research, which is the Schooler and colleagues article, which is considered a foundational article in the mind wandering literature. One of the most important concepts from this study is meta awareness, which refers to how aware we are of our own thoughts. The study found that people often fail to notice when they've drifted off. When participants were probed unexpectedly, their rates of mind wandering were much higher than when they had to report it themselves. This means that mind wandering is not just common, it's also frequent outside of our awareness. We can be mentally absent without realizing it. This helps explain why people often underestimate their mind wandering frequency and why mind wandering disrupts tasks like reading or driving. We don't notice it soon enough to correct it. When we look across all four studies, a fuller picture of mind wandering emerges. First, mind wandering hurts performance when a task requires working memory, continuous attention, or rapid reactions, like, as we've said many times, reading or driving. Second, it can improve creativity when the task is undemanding and allows the mind to drift productively. Third, it is often unconscious, meaning we don't realize that we're mind wandering until after the fact. Fourth, the impacts depend heavily on task demands, which explain why it can be beneficial in one situation and harmful in another. Together, these studies show that mind wandering is not just one dimensional. It plays multiple roles depending on the context. Now, what does this tell us about the mind? Attention is limited. We simply cannot hold our focus indefinitely, especially on repetitive tasks. Second, mind wandering is spontaneous and difficult to control. It happens even when we try to stay engaged. Third, working memory works breaks down during mind wandering, which is why reading comprehension and driving performance decline. But the brain also uses mind wandering as a time for processing, planning, problem solving, and creative incubation. Mind wandering appears to be a built-in to be at sorry. Mind wandering appears to be a built-in feature of how we think. Instead of viewing it as purely negative, these studies suggest it serves adaptive and maladaptive purposes depending on the situation. Follow-up study idea. One gap in existing research is how mind wandering interacts with digital media. For example, TikTok and Instagram provide rapid bursts of information, which might either suppress mind wandering or make it easier to drift off. My follow up study would investigate whether mind wandering during smartphone use affects later learning or memory. Participants would scroll through a social media feed while their attention is probed, and then they would complete a memory test. This would help determine whether our phones reduce mind wandering, increase it, or simply change its nature. It would also have practical implications for how students use technology while studying. Finally, in conclusion, mind wandering is an everyday cognitive process that plays a major role in how we think and perform. It can also disrupt learning and safety, but it can also enhance creativity. Understanding it helps us regulate our attention more effectively and use mind wandering to our advantage. Thank you for listening.